Last week, we saw the release of Wonders of Sodor, a brand new game that allows the player to drive around Sodor's railways as various characters. It was developed by Dovetail Games and runs on the Train Sim World framework. It's a lot of fun, and I definitely recommend it if you have even a passing interest in Thomas and Friends. I streamed it the day it came out, and got a lot of enjoyment out of it. Oh, I thought it was going to derail then. Oh! Crikey! The game's story campaign follows the events of various stories from the books and the TV series, as well as a few original stories on top. I figured that it would be a good idea to recreate scenes from some of these new stories in the style of the books, and now seems like as good a time as any to do so. I've picked 3 stories to recreate, starting with the first one of the 3 that appears in the campaign, Emily and the Express. In this story, Emily is pulling a goods train but is stopped midway through her journey in order to help out Gordon, who is broken down in the middle of the line. Emily brings the train to Maron Station and then continues the express service all the way to Knapford. I originally expected that we'd have to drop Gordon off at Maron, but no, he remains on the train throughout the journey. I imagine it would have been more realistic to have dropped Gordon off at the nearest siding, but having the 2 engines coupled to the train makes for an interesting picture, so I've included the both of them here. I adapted Emily into the Railway series style in an earlier video of mine. In said video, I reimagined Emily as an engine who worked on a number of different railways across the mainland before eventually being acquired by the Fat Controller, who restored her to her original condition as a heritage engine for use on rail tours. I imagine that in this version of the story, Emily would have been pulling some sort of enthusiast special before having to attend to Gordon's train. I'm not sure what would happen with the enthusiasts, who would have probably paid good money to have travelled behind Emily. Maybe they would be entitled to free seats on the express that Emily was slated to rescue, or maybe another heritage or otherwise veteran engine would have been called to continue their train. In my initial video on Emily, I mostly talked about her relationship with Thomas in the modern day, but this drawing gives me an excuse to theorise what Railway series Emily's relationship with Gordon would have been like. Given they are of the same lineage, both express passenger locomotives built by the Great Northern Railway, perhaps Emily fusses over Gordon like an overbearing mother or grandmother, doing her best to take care of him, but Gordon isn't always appreciative. "Oh, did my little Gordy-Wardy break down again? Don't worry, you'll soon be alright. Emily, I told you not to call me that in public." Etc, etc. The important thing is that, with Emily around, the express can get moving again, and soon the commuters will be able to return home. And, with all that said, here is the completed drawing. Here's another drawing, this time of the story Shunting Showdown, in which Thomas and Diesel challenge each other to see who can shunt their trains more quickly. It's hard to know exactly where a story like this could fit into the Railway series, since in the Railway series continuity, Diesel lives on the mainland and has only visited Sodor twice, being sent home in disgrace both times. Perhaps this is set in an alternate timeline. In the Duck and Diesel trilogy, Diesel tells lies about Duck to the troublesome trucks, which causes the big engines to turn on Duck as they think he's been insulting them behind their backs. When the Fat Controller hears about this, he sends Duck to Edward Station to get him out of the picture, to see if the insults keep happening with Duck away elsewhere. Of course they do, and Diesel is found out. Perhaps, in this alternate timeline, the Fat Controller relocates Diesel instead, setting him to work at Vickerstown Yards. He still needs another engine to show Diesel what to do, and so he enlists the help of Thomas, who is familiar with Vickerstown Yards as he used to shunt there back in the olden days. At first, Thomas isn't too happy with being called away from his branch line, but decides to make things fun by challenging Diesel to a race to see who can shunt their trains faster. When I played this level in the game for myself, I don't think I shunted my train particularly quickly. It took me a while to get used to shunting trains in the game after several levels of point A to point B missions, but I still managed to get my train shunted before Diesel. Maybe, if this were a Railway Series story, Diesel would deliberately dawdle, or perhaps just continue to dive headfirst into shunting trains without asking for help first, causing more problems for himself like what happened on his first day. At any rate, Thomas would shunt his trains quicker and rub it in Diesel's face, which could incentivise Diesel to do better next time. Either that, or start spreading rumours about Thomas like he did with Duck. And so, here is the finished drawing. The final story we'll be covering is First Class Engine. This is part of the James DLC that comes with the deluxe edition of the game. I've heard people give their opinions on whether or not James should have been DLC, or if another engine should have been put behind an extra paywall instead. I mentioned this in the stream. There should be a link to the VOD in the description, and I think the reason why James was chosen as the DLC was because the game essentially has 4 types of engine. Small tank engines in the form of Thomas and Percy, medium-sized tender engines in the form of James and Emily, large tender engine in the form of Gordon, and a diesel engine in the form of Diesel. Dovetail probably wanted one of each type in the base game. Thomas obviously had to be in the base game, and I don't think it would have been a great look to lock the only female engine behind an extra paywall, so their only choices would have been James and Percy. I think James would be easier to justify paying extra for compared to Percy. Speaking of DLC, it seems as though the game has done pretty well for itself, and so it seems fairly likely that Dovetail will eventually begin working on add-on packs for the game. I could see a Brendan Branchline pack with Edward, Bill, Ben and maybe Salty. A Little Western pack with Duck, Oliver and perhaps the Scottish twins seems possible as well. The narrow gauge engines would be a fun addition, and I could maybe see some smaller, less expensive add-ons just featuring a new character and some extra stories not linked to new locations, such as Henry or Rosie. Anyway, back to First Class Engine. This story involves James being tasked with pulling the mail train and, being James, forgetting to wait for all the mail to be loaded at one of the stations. Fortunately, a post van is driven to the next station to hand the remaining post bags over to James's mail coaches. The story begins with James and Percy at Knapford Station at night. In the Railway series, of course, Knapford is not a large station with a glass roof like in the show, but rather a smaller junction that connects the main line to Thomas's branch line. My line of thinking is that James could handle the post train on the main line, whereas Percy is in charge of delivering the mail on the branch line. I wanted an excuse to draw a scene at night, as well as replicate the C. Reginald Dolby style again after a long time, and so that influences several aspects of the finished piece. And, speaking of the finished piece, here it is. And there we are, 3 drawings based on some of the original scenarios that can be played in Wonders of Sodor. This is really just scratching the surface. I could gush about this game all day. It's not perfect by any means. In particular, I think the free roam mode could afford to be a bit more intuitive. Oh dear. But the overall package is great. I could talk about the hidden Easter eggs and deep cut references, I was very surprised to see the river barge from Trust Thomas appear in the game, and I had to recreate the crash on stream like I believe pretty much every Thomas fan has done at this point. Danger lay ahead. "Now for our plan," giggled the trucks. "Go faster, go faster." "Slow down," called Thomas's driver, and applied the brake. Oh! Well, we made it in the end. The crashes in particular are a bit loopy, but if anything, that enhances the game even more, and I eagerly anticipate the first accidents will happen music video recorded in the game. Yes, I have discovered the glitch that allows you to keep the game running after a derailment. All in all, Wonders of Sodor is a great time, and if the game's premise interests you at all, I definitely would recommend you to buy it, if you haven't already. #NotSpawn.